Salve omnes. Welcome to the screencast for Caesar's De Bello Gallico, Book 1, Chapter 6. So, in this chapter, the Helvetians, even though Orgetorix is dead, decide they're still going to follow through with the plan, and they have to choose which route they're going to go. They could take it the easy way or the hard way. So, I've taken this from the Dickinson College Commentary site, which I highly recommend that you guys take a look at. It has lots of maps. It has actually for this chapter a YouTube video that can really help you get your head around what their choices were, what the terrain was like, but just kind of in brief, you got the Helvetii living up here, and they could choose to take the red path, which is kind of the harder path because it skirts just between the Jura Mountains and the Rhone River, the Rhodanus. And so they're in this kind of narrow little bottleneck here where they'd be exposed from people on higher ground. With the river, there's a part where they can only go single file, so they'd really be exposed going that way. And even though they've made efforts to make friends with their neighbors, it wouldn't take many to really cause a lot of damage. So what they would prefer to do is take the easy path, right? So come down the green one. There's even a bridge over the Rhone here at Ganawa, so they could just cross right over. Check it out with the Allobroges. The Allobroges had recently been subdued, like 3 years before, by the Romans, but they weren't necessarily great fans of the Romans because the Romans had put down an independence movement. So if they'll just let them kind of cross over here and cross through their territory, they can get where they're going much, much, much easier. So those are their choices. This is the one they elect to try, though Caesar is not having it. And then they're even when they say, well, okay, we'll go the other way. He's like, nope. Now that I know what you're doing, you can't go either of them. So anyway, that's kind of what this chapter is about. Let's do it. Erat omnino itinera duo quibus itineribus domo exira possent. So in all, omnino, there were two routes, two journeys, but here route seems to be what he's talking about. By which routes, pretty common outside of Caesar as well, but definitely in Caesar, to repeat the antecedent to make really extra clear for your reader or your listener what you're talking about. So there were two routes by which routes they could leave home, right? And so this possent, notice imperfect subjunctive, probably a relative clause of characteristic, right? So two routes by which sorts of routes they could get out. One, understand iter, so one route through the Sequani, in the territory of the Sequani, narrow and difficult, and gustum et difficile, between Mount Jura and Flumen Rhodanum, the river Rhodanus, or you could call it the Rhone, if you remember what they're called. The AP is okay if you just leave the Latin names as Latin names. So, so this route through the Sequani, it's narrow, it's difficult, it goes between the mountain and the river. Weeks qua singly care ducerentur. So the weeks hardly or scarcely really belongs with the ducerentur, and it's popped all the way out of the relative clause for emphasis. So, so a route where or by which carts can scarcely be led single file. So where carts are barely led one right after the other. Moreover, altum, besides even that, a very high mountain, Mons Altissimos Impendebant, was hanging over it, so probably result clause here, so that per pauci, very few, a tiny band of men, could easily block them, right? So there is one route, it's narrow, it's tough, and they're totally exposed to the mountain. And when they're just going single file, it would be very easy for anyone opposed to them to stop their progress. Alterum, so the other route, through our province, multo facilius et expeditius, so much easier and more unencumbered, right? So fewer obstacles that way, easier and more unencumbered. Notice here, these are comparative adjectives. They're going to be the adjectives in the neuter going with the alterum iter understood. So not the adverbs here, but the adjectives going with an understood iter. So the route through our province is much easier Propterra Quad because the Rhone flows between the boundaries of the Helvetii and the Allobroges, who recently had been pacified, who had been made peaceful, and that's talking about the Romans in 61 essentially crushing a resistance movement among the Allobroges. So um, and uh, and uh, this path is crossed by a ford non nullis locis in not none places, right? So in several places. So there's several spots where you can get across into the Allobroges territory. Extremum opidum Allobrogium est, so the furthest town of the Allobroges and the one closest to the boundaries of the Helvetii is Genawa. So Allobrogium, the genitive there. So the furthest town of the Allobroges. And extremum, the furthest, means from an Italian's perspective, right? So Caesar's readers back in Rome, right? Their furthest town is Genawa. Ex eo opido, from that town, pons pertinent ad Helvetius. A bridge extends to the Helvetians. So, I mean, they don't have to ford the river. They can just cross the bridge. So, score. Alabrogibus say, existimabant, well. All right, so main verb's going to be existimabant. Let's start there. So they, the Helvetii, were thinking that, and now the rest of it pretty much is going to be indirect statements. So we're thinking that they either, so we've got this either would persuade the Allobroges because they viderentur, they seemed. Remember, the passive of videre, to see, comes out in English as seem. So because they seemed not yet in good mind, right, not yet kindly disposed toward the Roman people. I remember what he was saying about having been recently pacified. They're still a little miffed about that, so if someone wants to go through Roman territory, you know what, go for it. So they thought either they would persuade the Allobroges or we coactors, or compel them by force to allow them to go through their territory. So hopefully they could just make it easy. Hey, can we use your bridge? You guys don't like the Romans. We're just going to kind of skirt through Roman territory and get out of there. Sure, we don't like the Romans either. Cross the bridge. That's if they persuade them. Or, no, you can't cross the bridge. Yeah, I think we can, and just push their way through. Either way, they're hoping to punch right through. Omnibus rebus ad profectionem comparatis. That's all the abab. So with all the things gathered for setting out, they dicunt diem, they set a day, qua die, on which day everyone would gather at the bank of the Rhone. Is dies, this day was 5 days before the calends of April, in the consulship of Lucius Piso and Aulus Gabinius. So we're talking 58 BC, and 5 days before the calends of April gets you back to March 28th. So we know exactly when their plan for setting out was supposed to happen. March 28th, 58 BC. All right, so that's the screencast for 1.6.